Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at the Oblivion Remaster on the RTX 3060 12GB. You can see all of its specs here in GPU-Z. Of course, we have 12GB of GDDR6 video memory. The card that we're using is the EVGA XC version. It's a dual fan setup, a small, compact, and affordable card that actually, in my experience, is actually pretty strong. Over here in MSI Afterburner, you can see we're just leaving the card completely stock and playing on the latest drivers, which does include the hotfix that NVIDIA released a few days ago to address some issues that were primarily with 50 series GPUs. And for this video, we're going to be focusing specifically on 1080p and the 1080p experience that you can expect on this game on this card. All right, to start off here, we're going to be at 1080p, of course, as with all these settings. We're going to be on the low settings with software ray tracing set to low. For native quality, we're going to be using TAA, which is the cheapest form of anti-aliasing. Now, this looks terrible, of course, and the reason it looks so bad is that by default, it ties these quality presets here to resolution scale. So I don't know why it does that. I wish it was more transparent about that, but we are going to go ahead and bump up and of course play at 100% resolution scale for each of these settings. So starting off here at 1080p low, and you can see we are getting native here with the cheapest form of anti-aliasing, a 60 FPS experience, which is pretty nice. Now at low, that also does set our view distance to low, so you will see like a lot of pop-in coming into place really right in front of us, which is super unpleasant. So I imagine even if you're playing it low, that is one setting I would go in and bump up manually, just because it is a pretty bad experience playing with all of these effects kind of coming in within our view. As you can see, it's like really like 5 or 6 feet away from our character here. All of this kind of grass and textures and things like that kind of pop in. Not a great experience, but certainly to start off with here, we are getting, 60 plus FPS experience completely raw native, which is good to see. In reality, this card, of course, does have DLSS, so it's much more likely that you'll be playing at the minimum DLSS quality, which will give you better anti-aliasing than TAA most of the time, and of course, the added benefit of a little bit of an FPS bump. So just running around here to this patch of rocks here, that'll be our kind of short little run that we record, and you can see we're right about 64 FPS average. Next setting here, medium preset, still using RT low at native TAA and 100% resolution scale. And this is not quite a 60 FPS experience so far. Imagine as we kind of continue on, it may improve a bit. When we look at our video memory, we're not using much, about 6.5 gigabytes. Certainly a playable experience here. It does feel smooth, but it's just not quite 60, and I know we could get there even with just some mild upscaling. Here at medium though, another thing you will notice is our view distance is much better. So the pop-in that's happening is it's still happening, but it's happening quite a bit further away from our character to the point where it's not really noticeable. If you're looking for it, if you're like going over to this rock here and you're kind of running over to it, you will notice things pop in. It's not just going to be as noticeable as on low is the only thing. And as far as our video memory goes, we are not using much. We are climbing as far as our FPS now in 57 FPS average, kind of doing that same run over to these rocks here. Our video memory is kind of creeping up, which I imagine is due to the fact that we are kind of loading in more things. So now we're right about 7 gigabytes, maybe a touch under, because remember you have to divide by 1024 for the megabytes to gigabytes conversion, but still, a very solid experience here, around 60 FPS average here at medium native. Now again, I imagine most people would use DLSS, so let's use DLSS quality, which does override our anti-aliasing, so it removes the need for any TAA. And now in this same scene here, we are getting, pretty considerable FPS bump, about 20 or so. If we keep moving around, may even be a bit more. And the game looks much better here too. So 1080p medium with just DLSS set to quality. Really solid experience here. You're still getting a high refresh rate, clean, sharp image, and still pretty decent visuals with minimal pop-in. Next setting here is the high preset, back to complete native using TAA, still on software low for ray tracing and 100% resolution scale. And now we're getting well below that 60 FPS. We may get a bit closer as we kind of finish our run, but at high, as far as like our immediate experience, just kind of looking around at the world around us, it doesn't look a ton different in my opinion from medium, but the view distance is something that you will notice. There is essentially no pop in now. Sure, if you look way off in the distance, like at this hill kind of in the center, that's the furthest with that single tree, that doesn't have the little grass texture, so you may notice what just popped in there. But really at this point is really only if you're really looking for it off in the distance will you notice that. Typically you're not really going to notice it a ton. The other kind of quirk though, as we kind of increase our graphic settings and we get a bit higher quality visuals, is TAA actually over time begins looking worse and worse because there are more details on the objects that we're actually using the TAA on. So it's not as many flat, low resolution textures. They're slightly higher resolution. So when that happens, you get a bit more of that smeariness. So it's just kind of a little bit of that quirk. The game also does really put a ton of detail on the ground, so the TAA does end up looking kind of blurry at times, but we are certainly under that 60 FPS mark that we want to be at. So 46 average for that little run there, and we'll see where we kind of bump up to when we just add in that DLSS quality. So of course this will replace our TAA here, and now we are real cleanly above 60 FPS DLSS quality at high settings. Essentially a really perfect experience here at 1080p. You know, DLSS and some of these AI technologies, they do catch some flack for kind of being fake and fake frames, fake resolution, all that. But really, this is where you kind of see it shining, is on these older GPUs and the lower end GPUs still being able to render these more intensive games at a good resolution and good quality and high FPS. So really solid experience here. Our VRAM is kind of creeping up into 8 gigabytes, not quite there yet, but I imagine as you know, if we were to keep kind of walking around the world and loading in more stuff, it would probably climb a bit higher. All right, last preset we'll test here is Ultra, which of course does automatically set our resolution scale to 100 using TAA, so still just native, no DLSS trickery going on whatsoever. And we are using still the RT low preset. And here at this point, our FPS is, I don't know if I would say unplayable, but certainly unpleasant at, you know, the around 30. And especially at these lower frame rates, you do start to see a lot more ghosting with TAA as we kind of like, if we look at this tree and kind of move left and right, you can see kind of some trailing left behind by the tree. Not a great image here. And, you know, as it starts to rain here, which is an even more intensive scene, our FPS tanks all the way down to 20. So let's go ahead and see. You can see we're getting around 19 FPS here with the rain. That is a pretty intensive effect. So we'll go ahead and wait out the rain just to show that it's still not great even without the rain, just to kind of keep things fair. All right, so here are same settings, waited out the rain, and we are getting a bit higher from 20 or 19 up to 25. So still not a great experience, but yeah, the rain does, and some of those weather effects, they do kind of affect things. So just because we didn't have that rain in the other runs, I wanted to make sure we were kind of giving it a fair shake. So if we look at that structure kind of off in the distance, and wow, there's some terrible ghosting going on here at this low FPS with TAA. You see that there is still popping even on the highest settings. Our video memory is still under control under our 12 gigabyte limit, so it's definitely nice. You know, on the 60 series card or 60 class card, we are still, you know, thankful for that 12 gigabytes. Definitely one of the things I wish NVIDIA was still doing was giving out 12 gigabytes on these series of cards. But yeah, certainly not a experience that I would personally opt for. The game doesn't look like mildly or wildly different at Ultra when compared to high. But let's see where we can get to at these same Ultra settings, just turning on our quality upscaling. So DLSS quality here, and doesn't quite get us to 60, but around 50 FPS here. Definitely a way smoother experience and also a way better looking experience. Let's go ahead and bump down one more down to balanced. And now at balanced, we are getting around 60 here. We'll go ahead and start counting here. It is varying pretty wildly here, but closer to 60. But again, you know, my main takeaway here is just how much this doesn't really look that much better than high. And we're really sacrificing quite a bit of FPS where we were getting here on high around like the high 70s to 80s. Now we're fighting for 60 here. So Not a super great trade-off in my opinion, but hey, we are playing at the highest setting aside from ray tracing, which we will go ahead and turn on now. All right, so going back just to raw native here, and now utilizing hardware ray tracing set all the way to ultra. So these are completely maxed out 1080p settings at native. And actually at this particular scene, we are actually getting pretty solid FPS. The ray tracing in this game is not super noticeable from what I have experienced. Even in indoor settings with like more, or indoor settings with more dramatic lighting, it doesn't really seem to make a huge difference. But I also do think this part of the run is slightly less intensive. So we'll go ahead and go back to the beginning of the run just to kind of see what we would be getting in comparison. So yeah, even back here at the beginning of the run, strangely enough, it's not really a very big, if any, FPS difference. So it seems those RT cores are pulling most of the weight and basically being unused otherwise. It's not really the same experience I've had on other GPUs so far, so it is a bit strange. It is dropping a little bit now, maybe a few FPS lower, but really not very impactful from what I can see. But, you know, that FPS difference, is it worth the ray tracing that, to my eye, you can't really tell a difference when the ray tracing is turned on? Probably not. You know, it has mandatory ray tracing anyway, so using the software does provide, in general, better performance, and really you're not missing out on a ton when it comes to visuals. But what if we wanted these max settings here and we still wanted a clean 60 FPS experience? How far would we have to push DLSS? So starting off here with quality, I think we know that's not going to get us here. And quality does add about 10 FPS or so. Definitely a much smoother experience now that we're above 30, but still not quite to 60. Going down to balance now. Balance does get us a bit higher now in 40. Still not 60, but balanced and quality, they both look great. You know, these DLSS models have really come a long way, and it's really impressive how far we can push down our resolution and scale up with DLSS and still get a pretty clean picture here. But still well below our 60 FPS target that we're kind of looking for here. All right, down one more now to performance. And at performance is when things start to look not so great. Doesn't really feel like we are playing at 1080p here. It feels much more like we are actually using upscaling, which is not really what you want to go for. And we're still not getting 60 FPS. So, you know, with this game, my main takeaway when it comes to the graphic settings and the FPS is that once you get to high settings, there's a lot of diminishing returns going to ultra, and then even more turning on ray tracing. So in my opinion, you're much better off kind of stopping at high, unless you have so much additional FPS that you're willing to kind of just turn on those settings in the event there is a scene that maybe looks a bit better. But yeah, still getting around 43 here at performance. So we do have ultra performance. So let's go ahead and turn that on now. So now last one here, ultra performance. And for this, I will bump up my sharpening just a little bit to 30 just to make it look a tad bit better. And now ultra performance, we are pretty close to 60. And in some cities and indoor areas, dungeons, shops, things like that, I could see 60 plus FPS being a possibility. But again, you're losing quite a bit of detail. Like if we look at these little strands of grass here, so we kind of move around like against a background like that, they look pretty terrible. So as far as my recommended settings here, I'd probably stick with high settings, the low software ray tracing, and DLSS set to quality. And I find that this gives you a high FPS, a real smooth experience, and really clean, solid visuals. So you're not really sacrificing a ton on either spectrum. You're still getting really clean and solid visuals while still getting a pretty high FPS that gives you a good experience.